So recording in progress. Okay.
Oh, yeah.
So why don't you start just by giving us a quick intro to you, how you ended up in Cianciana, what you do there, and then we'll start in with some questions.
Sure. Okay. So hi, everybody. My name's Scott Thompson. I moved to Sicily in 2007. I've had a construction company for 25 years now. And I started off in the UK as a specialist in doing basement conversions in Manchester. So I spent all day digging holes underground, burrowing underground and staying under there till the sun went away. And then in 2007, sick and tired of the cold, wet, rain and dark, I decided that I would have an experience in the sun in Sicily, and I found a house here for €5,000. I think it was the first house I bought. It was pretty much a ruin, but that was the point. I was coming here to build, to buy something and build and have an experience of working in the sun. So in 2007, I came with one of my labourers from back Manchester, and we came for 3 months to renovate a house. It didn't go, back then it was pretty much a Wild West out here, so there wasn't really any established estate agents. Most places didn't have websites. I got into all sorts of trouble, mainly because the guys that I'd bought the house from were supposed to organise planning permissions for me to do the works and all this kind of stuff, which they hadn't done or not done properly. So what started off as a 3-month come out and build and go back home turned into 6 months and a year. And then while I was here and work on my house was kind of stopped, some other people turned up in town and said, "Oh, would you fancy building a house for us while you're here?" And 15 years later, I'm still here and still doing that. So yeah, it's nice. It's been really interesting because I've seen the town go from quiet, no real foreigners here. I was kind of the first or second foreigner in town, to now, I don't know, I think there's around 400 houses they've sold in Cianciana, which is great. So yeah, so my experience is really a trial by fire here. I got here and the house that I bought was just a ruin. It was 4 walls. There was floors in it, but we had to knock all the floors out and literally start from kind of 4 walls scratch sort of thing. The materials here are different. The ways that they build are different from the UK. How they run electricity, water, all this kind of stuff was different. So it took me a while to learn the differences, the way they do things here, and the fact that some things they do here are better than the way we did them in the UK, and some things are so trying to find that kind of balance between local skills and materials that are available, because especially here in the small towns in Cianciana, you know, I'm used to an enormous B&Q warehouse. I can go and buy whatever I want at any time of day. Back in the UK, here it's not that easy. And whilst local materials and local techniques are quite cheap, or relatively cheap, I suppose, if you want to upgrade your house, let's say, insulation and plasterboard, wooden flooring isn't something that they use here. It can get quite expensive because you've got to get it from somewhere else, either outside of Sicily or at least Palermo or Catania. Some of the things they do here are great, actually. The plumbing pipework system is fantastic. The new stuff is much better than the pipework we use in the UK. The way they run the electrics is a bit strange to me. It kind of can go all over the walls, whereas in the UK we go, vertically down. Everything's running a certain line. Here, hanging a picture can be somewhat taking your life in your own hands if you're not sure where the nail's going. So that's kind of my background. That's how I got started, and since then I've just been, I think I've personally done a fair few houses here, from new builds. At the minute I'm just finishing a brand new villa in the countryside that's a prefab house in timber, and then this, which is my house, is a 1600s kind of corner of a noble house that's been knocked through and redone so many times.
So a lot of the people in the group, sorry, you keep freezing. A lot of the people in the group are sort of just starting out on this journey. They've heard about these bargain houses in Italy, and they're just starting to kind of explore. What sort of advice would you give to somebody who maybe plans a trip to Sicily to go look at places? How would you suggest they go about the initial stages?
So I think it's really important to see the place, as in the town that you want to be in. So I know a few people who bought online without even coming out and visiting the place, and I would recommend against that. I would say come out and see it, because some people walk into Cianciana and go, wow, I love this place, it's for me. And some people walk in there and go, where the hell am I? This is horrendous. I have to get out of here now. I'm in the first part, I loved it when I first got here. But I would say definitely come and see it. Kind of here in Cianciana, I've always worked with a small kind of ballpark. So people who are buying a small house buy small houses, kind of the typical Sicilian townhouse, which is more or less 1 or 2 rooms on the ground floor, and then maybe 2 or 3 stories, which are exactly the same on top of that. And they tend to have a staircase running along one side of the house. So you've got to go through every room. So that's kind of the standard house here in small town Sicily. And for those things, I've always said people need a budget of around 50 grand. Now that might be 40 grand to buy it and 10 grand to make it look a bit nicer, or 10 grand to buy it and 40 grand to redo. It always ends up around there. And obviously you can spend whatever you want on a house, and you can do a lot to it to go over that, and you can obviously live really simply and save on that. The one thing I would say is that now, especially this year here in Sicily, we've had the hottest day in Europe on record. We've had, here in Cianciana, we've had snowballs, we've had tornadoes, we have the first tornado ever in Sicily this year, and we've had 20 of them this year. And it's now freezing. I've got 2 jumpers on, so what I would say is that you really kind of need to build here. A lot of people arrive and they'll think, right, okay, I'm going to do the bare minimum. I'm going to plaster the walls and keep the house pretty much as it is. I like the traditional windows. I'll keep them on. Now, that's all great. I'm not saying don't do that. What I'm saying is that makes your house livable in spring and maybe autumn. But in the summer, it's going to be too hot. And in the winter, it's going to be too cold. So you have to think, and they won't, because here the traditional builders, especially in the small towns, there isn't many contractors, and you don't need to work with an architect, and the local geometers will just say, okay, slap some cement on this wall, we'll plaster it, we'll get that ceiling changed as we would do, and they won't think about that kind of the necessity to insulate your house. It's so important here, insulating your house, insulating your roof, decent windows on walls. So that's probably the first thing I would say to someone is when they buy a house, think about how livable the house is going to be all year round when it's actually going to be used. If you're only going to come out for 2 weeks in June and that's it, then fine, then it doesn't matter. If you might want to come out for longer, or you're thinking down the line, I'd like to retire and spend 6 months a year here, then you've got to think about that. And those kind of things can be expensive. Insulation,
air conditioning,
plasterboard, heat pump. At the minute, there is, I want to talk about the bonuses, I'm going to come to them in a minute. At the minute, there's quite a few bonuses here for replacing air conditioning.
Sorry, Scott, you're freezing. What did you say? There's a bonus to replace what? You got stuck.
So air conditioning units, heat pumps to replace central heating, and solar water heaters for hot water. I think all those things are crucial. Definitely do it. If you can get solar panels on the roof, if you can enter in one of these bonuses, then great, get it done through the bonus scheme. If you can't enter into the bonus scheme, there's still kind of 50%. Quite often you can buy air conditioning units 50% off, or the water heaters 50% off because of this kind of incentive system that's going in.
So if somebody were interested in using the bonus, say for air conditioning, is that something that they would need to do, or would their contractor handle that, or who manages that process?
So you have to have, as with a lot of things in Sicily and Italy, it's a bit of a minefield, paperwork-wise, bureaucracy-wise. So you need an architect or a geometer to do that for you. A lot of them don't even charge. If you enter into the Centro 110% bonus scheme, their fee is actually covered in it. So it doesn't cost you to get them to do the work. So that's fine. The kind of the making sure that your house is eligible to be worked on under the 110% bonus. There's quite a few hoops you've got to jump through. So you've got to have an existing heating system of some sort. You're going to be replacing something. You can't just put in new for nothing. You've got to go up at least 2 energy classes. So the majority of old houses here are class G, which is pretty much the bottom. You've got to at least go up 2 energy classes with the changes that you're going to make. The thing is that the house has to be as it is on the plans. So the catastro, which is where you register your, I can't think of the name in English, where you register the layout of your house and your land registry. So yeah, the house has to be laid out like that. If the house has been changed and not registered that change, then you don't come in under the bonus scheme. That said, there are still lots of other bonuses that your architect or your geometry can put you onto, and they are things like 50% off, 70% off. There's a seismic bonus actually, which is quite good, because that's if you're in an area that's seismic risk, which most of Sicily is, and you need works doing like replacing floors or roofs, then the seismic bonus can be quite good, because if you restore your house using kind of earthquake proof methods, you get that covered as well, which means you can have a whole new floor put in. And if you get that new floor put in, then obviously you can run new electrics in alongside that, because you've taken them out. So you can get a lot of work done internally on the seismic bonus. And it's also good because if you see a lot of these houses, the old ones that you're buying, will have movement cracks and structural marks in them that you can maybe get fixed with a seismic bonus. But it's an architect or a geometer that needs to do all the paperwork and the submission for that.
So you mentioned cracks. Are there specific kinds of cracks or other things that should be warning flags for people when they are touring properties, or things that they should look out for to know this is going to be a bigger project than you may think it's going to be?
Yeah, so it depends on the type of building that you're looking at. If you've got a concrete structure, so if you've got beams and pillars, then any cracks in those is a real warning sign that something's moved. And those are very expensive to change. If how like this one that I'm in, which is a really old one, built out of kind of, it's almost dry stone walls in reality, the kind of meter thick walls or 60 centimeter thick walls of tufa blocks that have been pointed on the outside, but that's a lie. They're not actually cemented together. It's dry stone walls and pointed. Those houses will move a lot, but the nice thing about them is that when they move, they don't break, they just move, because there's nothing kind of to break, you know, it's just the individual parts that jig around together. This little dance looks good on Zoom. So a structural crack in a dry stone building like that is not as scary, because it's fairly simple fix. You know, if you've got movement of a wall that's moving away from the house, you just need to pin it in at the front. If you've got a concrete structure that's got cracks in it, that's more concerning. Most of the houses here are terraced houses, so your side walls and your back walls tend to be leaning against someone else's house. That's okay. If they've got a bit of movement laterally, then it's no great shake, because the whole structure of the road holds each house up. If, however, the front of the house is leaning away or starts to lean away, which could indicate that, especially these houses built on the sides of slopes, as Cianciana is, you know, all in the mountains. If the street's moving downwards and the front of the house starts to move back out, that can be a bit more of a problem. It's still a fairly easy fix, but it can be more of a problem. So cracks on the front of houses that make it look like the front wall is detaching from the side walls, they're scarier cracks than, you know, a crack on the inside somewhere in a random room. No great shakes. So yeah, front wall cracks are the ones to keep your eye out. Are
there any other specific kinds of things that if you walked into a house and you saw it, you would say, well, this is not a good sign?
So one of the things that people live here kind of the biggest complaint actually by people who buy and renovate here is that 12 months later, the house is damp on the ground floor, and the plaster's falling off all the way around the damp floor. Italians, Sicilians tend to just live with that. That's a normal thing. And I know it drives us wild, the thought of having damp there. They just repaint it every year. These houses don't have foundations. They don't have damp course membranes. They are just sandstone sat on top of soil. So stopping rising damp is almost impossible at the ground floor. If you've got air coming into your ground floor, so if the ground floor of your house is open to street level and you've got windows and things like that, that'll help. The majority of the ground floors of these houses were stables or workshops. And to be honest, that's the best use for them because they're a nightmare to keep dry. My workshop's on my ground floor here. So my house starts on the first floor, which is great because I have no damp problems and none of that, but my garage is a nightmare. The only way around it, if you're going to build on the ground floor, is to do what we would do back in Manchester before I came here in basements, and that is to tank the inside of the walls, membrane, stud wall, plasterboard, and just let the damp come through and don't let it come through into the room. So things to kind of be aware of are large ground floor rooms with no windows or air movement, and houses that are kind of, you're restricted of having a large portion of your house on the ground floor. So there's 2 floors maybe. You just got to be aware of this problem. You don't, in the summer, it's freezing. You think, oh, this is a lovely, cool room. Oh, it's nice being in here. It's no problem. And then in winter, it's cold and it's damp and it stays that way for 6 months. So yeah. Ground floor is something to be aware of. What does it look like? Does it feel damp? Does it look damp?
Are there things that aren't really a big deal that some people might freak out about, like roofs or stairs or something? They come in, they see there's a problem with it, and they think, oh, this is going to be too expensive, when actually it's not that big of a deal?
Yeah, I mean, the cost of replacing floors in every house I've bought here, I've knocked out the floors from ground to and the roof. It's not a major cost to put a floor back in, a new floor. They used to doing it. They used to do it pretty quickly. Most of the builders here. So it's not as scary a cost as things like insulating or doors and windows, for example. I think the first house I did was about 25 square meters per floor, and it cost me about 3,000 per floor to replace the entire floor. So when you think about it, that's not, 2 floors in a 3-story house, ground floor, first floor, so £6,000, you pretty much got a whole new structure on your floors. They all look, unless it's funny, I'm looking for a house in Palermo at the minute with my girlfriend. So we're moving to Palermo, and we walk into houses that are kind of half done, or nearly ready, or they were done in the 60s. It's like your grandma's house, and my girlfriend feels much more at home with that and thinks, oh, this is lovely, we don't need to do a lot to it. And then we'll walk into some houses that are complete ruins and you've got to do everything to it. And I see those and think a better deal, because if a house is nearly done, unless you like it, you've got to undo it all. You know, if there's nice tiles on the floor, but I've got to change the tiles anyway, why pay for a house with nice tiles on the floor? It's cheaper to buy it, to knock a floor out and put a brand new floor in, than it is to start chipping away at tiles, re-cementing this, doing, you know, you can take a floor out and put it back in a day. Whereas, you know, trying to kind of work around it. So structural stuff here, because they're so good at working with the structure, and it's a very simple structure, is pretty cheap to do. So taking floors out, plastering walls, chasing out, things like that. When it looks like a bit of a horror scene, I wouldn't panic about it too much. The expensive things to do are vaulted ceilings. So if you see vaulted ceilings that are going to fall in, or that look like they're not sturdy, they're expensive to fix. Just a flat floor is easy. As soon as you put a vaulted ceiling in it, it's a lot harder. Roofs, to be honest, I would, if you're buying one of the kind of houses to renovate, I'd always say change the roof anyway, because it's not a major cost and you want to insulate it, and they won't be insulated in the old houses. They're just the old terracotta tiles, sat straight on wood, and that's it. So even if the underside is quite nice, insulate and put some new tiles on it. What else?
You mentioned the geometra and an architect. How do people go about finding these people when they go to Italy? If they don't speak Italian, how do they find good ones? How do they manage who does what? If you can talk about the people involved.
Yeah. So kind of the traditional way that project management, which is my job, is not really a thing yet in Sicily, unfortunately. Here you tend to have an architect and a geometer, and in some unclear kind of organization, the architect and geometer between them will manage the project. Essentially, they are an architect, kind of as we would have an architect back in the UK or anywhere, and a geometer makes up maybe the work of a quantity surveyor or a site engineer. In reality, there's quite a few differences between the actual trades here and how they're kind of utilised in the UK, because in the UK, those two jobs, geometer and architect, is 10 different jobs. You know, you've got site engineer, site manager, project manager, structural engineer, you know. So here you tend to use an architect more for the design of something. If you don't know what you want it to look like, if you don't know how it should function or flow, you want someone to design your house, architect. And if you need full plans, so if you're demolishing and rebuilding, or if you're building from scratch, you also need an architect. Otherwise, a geometer can pretty much do everything for you, and they cost a bit less. If it's just restoration work, a geometer can do most of that. Unfortunately, so my job has always been to, I work for the customer. If you know if you're my customer, my job is to save you money. My fee is agreed beforehand. You know how much I'm going to charge. I'm not to make any money off anything else. My job is to get 3 quotes from plumbers, get you the best plumber. Find this for you from the best price. That role is really important here, but it doesn't really exist here yet, because your architect will have his builders and his plumbers and his guys, and quite often, I'm not saying this is everywhere, but quite often he's getting a kickback from all those things. The furniture, you know, now I've just set up my new business where I moved to plan furniture, and for marketing is all architects, and the first question is, how much do I get? You know, so if you've got an architect to design your house and you're paying him £1,000 for doing that, he's also getting paid a couple of £100 off the guy who does the kitchen, a couple of £100 off the guy who does this, a couple of £100 off the guy who does that. So the cost of your work is going up, and not really, that's not how it should happen. Certainly not how it happens in the UK. You know, everyone's pitching.
Hey,
If
Scott,
you're not going to be,
can I just to let everybody know, the time limit on this session is going to end in 7 minutes. So
Okay,
if people still have questions, we'll just pop out and then pop back in again with the same link. So just to let everybody know, if there's still questions, we can just come back in again. And if you do have questions, feel free to ask them, or if you want, you can click on the chat thing at the bottom of the screen and type in your question, and I can ask for you if you don't want to talk. Go ahead.
if you're not going to be here to manage the build, you really need someone that you kind of trust around. Make sure that you always get 3 quotes for everything, or you know, I mean, even if it's not 3, even if it's a quote you're happy with and you know the person, you know, fine, but don't just go with the first guy that's really smiley and nice, because they're very good at that. Everyone is really smiley and nice. Sicilians are lovely people. That doesn't mean they're going to be punctual. It doesn't mean they're going to get stuff done when you need it to get done. And the other thing is, I would try and have some kind of written agreement as well in place. It's very difficult to hold people to a written agreement here, or to any agreement here, but it's so important in a construction process that people turn up when they're going to turn up, and people turn up when they say they're going to turn up, and things cost, and they cover the cost. So you really, if you're not going to be there, you need to really study everyone's quote. You know, has he loaded you 3 plug sockets, and you're assuming he's fitting 30 plug sockets, you're going to get slapped to the bill at the end, and that's kind of common. So yeah, it's tough. You tend to be with the geometer, but try and make sure that you've got someone else that you trust as well. If you find the main contractors, especially in the small towns, are few and far between. You'll hear prices of, you know, well, builders get paid €50 a day, builders get paid €60 a day, builders get paid €100 a day, whatever. If you go through a contractor, it's no cheaper for labour than it is back in the UK. For me, when I had my contracting company here, the cost of paying someone, was €60 a day, but then at another €60 then on top of that, insurance for the person per day, and then you've got your national insurance. It cost, I had to put people out at more like €200 a day, 150, €200 a day, just to cover the cost of employing them. So a lot of people choose not to go through a contractor and just to get, you know, Giuseppe, the builder from down the road, whose son plays in my garden, to come and do the work, because he might charge you 60, 80 euros a day, which is great. You save a fortune on your labour. You've got to be careful you don't get pulled up on that, and also bearing in mind that there's other implications in that if you restore a house, you need to show that you've spent some money doing that. And Giuseppe down the road can't give you an invoice for 60 euros a day. As soon as he's got an invoice, he's got to charge the insurance, all that kind of stuff. So kind of bear that in mind. yeah.
Are there other ballpark costs that people should bear in mind? You know, if you want to put in a half bath, expect to spend X. If you want to add a rooftop terrace, you know, just some rough figures for people to keep in mind.
It's really tough to put ballparks in for things like that. But probably, I mean, a roof terrace, probably, I think restoring a property would probably cost about €500 per square meter of property. You could, building a new property is more like 1,000 to 1,500. Restoring, you're looking around 500 per square meter. Now, that's not obviously every square meter has 500 quid in it, and it can vary from 50 quid a square meter to much more if you put, you know, gold-plated tiles down. I don't know, but €500 a square meter. Just as off the top of my head, there's a room across the street. How much would it cost? It's 100 square meters. You know, you're probably looking at 50 grand. If you know that's kind of obviously varies quite a bit, and that's more or less the same for a roof terrace. If you're putting in a roof terrace, it's probably cheaper, maybe looking at more like 200, 300 a square meter. Although you think a roof terrace is cheaper because it doesn't, you're taking the roof off, you don't actually have to have a covering on it. But if you're going to do a roof terrace properly, you need a fairly advanced floor, because it has to not only stop the water coming into the house, as your roof would have done, it also has to stop the heat coming in. And my bedroom, which is just behind me here, above there is my roof terrace. It's my excuse me, it's my roof terrace. And even though I've got a really well insulated floor, I think I've got about 10 centimeters of insulation up there, it still gets hot. You know, the floor in the summer on the roof terrace, you can't walk on it with bare feet. So you've got to think about that part as well. But yeah, maybe 200-300 square meter terrace, doors and windows. I don't know. I don't know per square meter off the top of my head, to be honest. But it's worth spending a bit more on doors and windows, getting a decent double glazed thing put in. Yeah.